Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and I am ready to give you my thoughts on Final Fantasy XVI. I have streamed over 60 hours in the past 4 days, beating the story, doing the side quests, doing the side content, talking to the NPCs, reading lore, everything you could possibly imagine I have been doing non-stop for the past several days. Right now I'm working through New Game Plus on the Final Fantasy mode difficulty, so I'll probably do something a little bit separate on that, but I want to give a spoiler-free discussion about how I feel about the game. I've played through it, I finished it, and by the way, I bought my own copy. This is not like, oh, Square provided me with a copy, you know, that whole thing that we normally have to do, because I bought a copy from the New Zealand PlayStation store so I could play 2 hours earlier than everyone else. Yeah, I really went that out of my way for this, but yeah, I'm going to do some spoiler-free thoughts on it, and then I definitely want to do some spoiler-filled thoughts. I always say I'm going to do that, and then I don't. For this video, I'm doing it largely off script. I just kind of have a few notes of things that I want to talk about. And again, it's spoiler free, but I'm still going to be using footage in the back. It's going to be like early game footage, stuff that was in the demo, or stuff that was like posted online from their various like media outlet things that they've done. So there is some stuff, plus some out of context exploration, some hunt gameplay as well. So if you don't want to see some of the hunt monsters, then, you know, it is what it is. You know, I need something to play in the back, but no major story spoilers, nothing on that front. So I'll just stick to early game stuff and we should be a-okay. So overall, some of the most captivating character performances in a story that I loved. It was action-packed. It was a roller coaster, just like they said. And at the end of it all, I am so glad that this is a game I got to experience in my lifetime. I'm not going to rank it compared to the rest of the franchise yet. I want to let it sit, let it marinate before I go like, oh, it's the best one I've ever played. It's at the top of my list. But I can tell you it's going to land in the upper echelon of the list. So I can at least tell you that right from the get-go. So I'm going to knock out a few of the simple things that I can't really talk about in a spoiler-free video as much as I really freaking want to. The music is phenomenal. There's so many tracks in this game that I just want to listen to. I need the soundtrack. I just want to have it on in the background, whether it be zone music or boss fights or certain things that Soken does in Final Fantasy XIV that he has definitely carried over into Final Fantasy XVI that I think a lot of people will appreciate whether or not you have that history with him and his musical style. It's just it's a great soundtrack. Not that you're surprised being it's a Final Fantasy game, but at least it's worth mentioning. And then, of course, the characters in the story. Oh, you have no idea how badly I want to talk about that aspect, because I think for me, as much as I'm a huge fan of the action combat, as much as I love the music, as much as I love the overall game, I think that this is the single strongest point of Final Fantasy XVI. There are so many characters across the main cast and side quests and little tiny details here or there that you'd expect to find them to fumble at some point. And there's bound to be characters that some people don't really jive with, or, you know, wish they'd met, or they just don't want them to talk anymore. Like, everyone's got different tastes. But I have never loved so many characters in a cast and just wanted to have them around more, hear them speak, hear what they had to say, listen to them interact. I've never had it be so widespread as it is in this game. I already had high expectations of the main cast from when I played back in London to the demo to the trailers. I was instantly kind of drawn to the characters they were creating and wanted to know more about the ones that we hadn't seen much of. But now I have grown to appreciate so much of the work that went into not only the main cast with Clive and Jill and all the other characters that we meet throughout the story, but the side characters. There were characters I didn't even know existed from the trailers and everything that I met, and I was just like, I love this person. I love everything they say. I love what they do. Or maybe I hate what they do, but it's like written in such a way that like it's good that I hate them. You know, it's not like this is a bad character. It's like this character is exactly who they're supposed to be, and I hate them for it. And thank goodness I hate them for it. And it's not silly and ridiculous or anything like that. And they cover so many tones across the characters in the story. There's darkness. There's humor. It's not one note. It's not singular in its efforts, I suppose is the best way to put it. And I think that you should definitely go out of your way to interact with and analyze as much of the environments and areas and characters as you can, because even the random NPCs around have some wild conversations that are happening in the back. And it's not as, I guess, I want to say it's not as annoying as Final Fantasy VII Remake, where there'd be like characters in the back and I just kind of wanted them to stop and not listen to them. There's going to be repeat lines that you experience if you run past a lot of the same NPCs over and over again, just having those idle conversations. But a lot of what they're saying is either informative of, you know, things that you could learn to expand on the world, or it's just straight up funny. So yeah, I think this is the thing that carries it the most. And as much as I would love to talk more about the individuals and the things they do, we gotta save that for another video. So just know this for me was the single strongest point of the game, and that is hard pressed because I thought it would be the gameplay, but no, it is definitely this. And this is why I know this game is going to land high up on my list, because that's one of the most major reasons why the top of my list is as strong as it is when it comes to the Final Fantasy game. So this one's going to land up there. Let's reel it back and talk about some gameplay systems and stuff. Because when it comes to gameplay systems, I think there are ups and downs when it comes to the game, things that may or may not bother you as an individual. First of all, exploration around the zones. For those of you who haven't been keeping up with the various, news outlets and interviews and whatnot, we were told that the game is broken up into a couple of different types of stages. We know that there's, kind of like a hub that you can go to, where you can get quests and craft and do all that kind of stuff. But we were also told there were field areas and stages. Now, stages are essentially you're dropped at the beginning of a stage, you play through, maybe check a few side paths, beat a few bosses along the way. It's a linear central objective that you're playing from beginning to end. Those I actually think were incredibly strong and varied, and I really enjoyed all the stages. But what I didn't really know what to expect was the field areas. And the field areas, especially as you're first exploring them, I think are of adequate size. They're not so large that they're kind of annoying to traverse or overly empty, but they're not so small that it feels like they skimped on anything, right? You still find these little nooks and crannies and secrets as you're going through them the first time, and you'll come out with like some items or something that you may need, or you may encounter an enemy you weren't expecting to encounter, etc., etc. So they're not revolutionary by any means, I would say. You're not going to be like finding anything too crazy, but at the very least, they're serviceable, they're fun, and they're not. I think for me, the biggest thing is exploration can be really tedious in games, and it's why I'm glad this wasn't an open world game. Instead, it has these exploration zones that you can go through and fulfill objectives in, and that I think worked really well. And I'm not surprised that they went with this either. I mean, this is, Creative Business Unit 3, and we know what they've worked on before, Final Fantasy 14. So creating these zones that are just kind of right feels like something they were already good at. And as they open up and expand and you get new objectives in them, then, you go back, revisit and all that. So exploration, solid. Nothing crazy, nothing like, oh my God, it's the greatest, but solid. And when it comes to that, that's all I really need. As for other gameplay systems, you have things like, your gear and crafting and consumables and items that you can find. And all of that is very standard. It's very much in line with what I expected from what we saw from State of Play and what I experienced when I played the demo and in London. It's very straightforward. It's very easy to understand. There's not a whole lot of min-maxing when it comes to that kind of stuff. It's really just complementing the things you're already doing or making yourself stronger gradually throughout the game. Your weapons and your armor in particular, as you go through the game, you'll upgrade it, you'll get more defense, you'll get more health, you'll do more damage, and that's the gist of it. You're not going to be looking for a specific sword for a specific build that you're trying to do, and I think they dropped the ball a little bit on that. I actually think they could have gone that route and it would have been okay, but I'm not surprised they went the route that they did. They leave that a little bit more open-ended with the accessories, but the accessories are also very linear. Do you want a skill to do more damage? Then great. Do you want it to have lower cooldowns? Great, equip that. It really just comes down to complementing whatever your individual flavor is without being anything, again, too crazy. There's actually a few more interesting accessories that I won't spoil for you, of course, and I think they could have done more of those outside of the timely accessories, by the way. There's things that are not automated, I suppose, but are more impactful to your overall gameplay and not just like enhancing certain aspects of it that you're already doing. And I think they definitely should have gone down more of a route with that. So for me, this is a neutral point. It's not a strong point. It's not a weak point, but you won't hear me being like, oh my God, the gearing system is amazing and it's great. No, it's serviceable. It does the job, but is nothing too fanciful. The same goes with the crafting and the consumables. You know, you got a consumable that increases damage, reduces damage taken, builds limit break, heals you. You've got all the standard consumables that you expect to actually get. And then on top of that, your crafting is usually just take base item and get a few materials, upgrade base item to be slightly stronger. And then as you go throughout the game, you can usually do a few upgrades here or there. Normally, when you pick something up that's a new item, you can usually upgrade it depending on what the item was. But again, it's only serviceable. It's not fanciful. It's not extravagant. It is just as is, I suppose. And then you've got the gameplay. Now, my opinion on the gameplay has not really changed if you've heard what I had to say about the demo or what about what I played in London. It's very much something that has a lot of depth, but does not necessarily demand the player to understand or utilize all of that depth. And that is largely because of the iconic skills. So the big thing is that Clive's sword play is largely where the technical aspects come in. Understanding how to do infinite aerial combos, extending combos with dodges or with certain iconic skills, and then staying on the enemy all the time with these skills, understanding how they work situationally, etc., etc. But if you're someone who doesn't want to get into all of that technical stuff, the game is built in such a way that basically understanding what the skills do and also picking the ones that you play the best with or like the best will be sufficient in order to get through the game and enjoy it. It's something that a highly skilled player might see and min-max and absolutely obliterate an enemy. But if you're a newer player, you literally can just read through things, pick what you like, try a few things, and you'll probably find something that you like or that is serviceable. It'll work for you, and that's all that really matters. Not to mention that if you're somebody who isn't particularly good at these games, you can do things like focus more on dodging and waiting out your iconic skills instead of trying to be like, oh, I'm hyper aggressive and, you know, dodge this and parry that and block this and I look super. You don't have to do all that. It's cool if you can. It's what I like to do. But by far is it not necessary in order to get through. And I think that kind of makes the combat meet this weird middle ground where people like me are super into the depth, and the game kind of reels that back a little bit to make sure that the average player isn't so intimidated that they kind of meet what I like to call skill paralysis, where they maybe see someone play the game who plays the game in a way they can't particularly play, and it almost intimidates them from playing. I don't know if that really makes sense. I like to equate it to, I guess, a fighting game. You ever see like a fighting game tournament and you see how they play and you've never really played, but you see that and you go, oh man, I don't even know how to like get to that point. And then it kind of almost stops you from playing because of the way the iconic skills work. I don't think that really happens here. And I think that's a really, really good thing for the sake of the average player. There's enough depth. There's enough things that when I'm playing and I pull off exactly the combo I want to pull off, I feel really, really good about it. And that's good for me. But I'm not everyone, and everyone isn't me. So I really want players to look at a game and think, ah, that just looks fancy and cool, let me do that. And I think it achieves that balance quite well. It means that really hardcore Devil May Cry players or action game players are probably going to hit their depth ceiling a lot quicker. But it also just means that more people can enjoy the game. And that's all I really want at this point. And that's not to say that like you won't experiment or find new things even if you are a high skill player. Every time I unlocked new skills or had the opportunity to try something different, I basically took it. I was mixing and matching icons and skills and trying to figure out how they work in burst windows. What do I want to do to get the stagger gauge down? Yeah, and then I also had to strategize for each individual enemy. Are there attacks I'm better at parrying? Are there attacks I'm better at blocking? What are the projectiles? Do I want to consider that? Am I bringing something like Heat Wave to counter the projectiles? Yeah. All of those things were constantly in consideration. And because of that, I do actually have one point that I wish they would have done, although I kind of still understand why they didn't. I would have liked the loadouts for my actual skills. I think that's one thing that would have made the combat better, because I was often struggling to try to find a system where I could equip stuff that was really better for just killing your average enemy, but I also needed to make sure I had stuff that was specifically better at killing bosses. Now, I could understand not having it because it's kind of tedious and annoying still to, oh, you know, the boss is coming, let me go to my menu and swap this and that. But if I'm already thinking of doing that, if you make it faster, it's something I might interact with a little bit more. So So instead, I ended up just being like, this is a decent mix of stuff that I can use on random enemies that works really well and stuff that I can use on bosses that works really well. And when I did find that sweet point where I felt like I had every skill that I needed for both situations, you know what, that was satisfying. And I think it was worth getting to that point and experimenting until I felt like I was at that point. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't still accommodate in other ways. So I'm really glad that the experimentation was as fun and fruitful as it was, because by the end of the game, I felt like an unstoppable monster with what I had discovered. And I'm sure that other people will feel similarly based on what they find that works for them. And I'm really curious to see what other people land on in their playthroughs. Now, this is where I kind of have to reel myself in, because trust me when I say I want to talk about some of the bigger specifics, but spoiler-free video, of course it is. I will say this for anyone who's wondering about total game hours or New Game Plus or any of the stuff that I've experienced or experimented with that are more superficial, or I guess some people value their games off of those things. It took me about 53 hours to beat the game, not 100%, but there wouldn't have been much left that I didn't do. There was just a few collectibles I was missing, and there was like maybe one other content that I didn't do that I eventually just went back and did in like 15-20 minutes anyway, so, you know, tack that on to the 53 hours. And I definitely feel like there still could have been more. I didn't sit there and read through every lore entry. I didn't analyze all the books. Like, if I really wanted to engage with the world more, I could get more out of it. If I wanted to slow down and take my time with certain aspects, I absolutely could have. But 53 hours for me is great. That's longer than I get out of most Final Fantasy games, especially after I've played them God knows how many times. And so far on New Game Plus, I'm playing through the Final Fantasy difficulty, which is a step above action focused, and I don't find it to be so much a big jump in difficulty as much as I see it as a mode that adequately allows you to enjoy your full kit against every boss in the game. And I'm going through that, and I'm doing no-hit challenges at the same time, but I'm seeing more boss attacks, I'm seeing more boss mechanics, things I would outright skip in my original playthrough, just because I had come up with a combo that for me works so well that I would often go from phase to phase, and as soon as I had actually, you know, broken an enemy's will, I often would just push them into the next phase, and so I could basically play around that and often didn't see every attack a boss could actually pull off. That's not the case here. I'm seeing most attacks, and I have to play a lot more cautious because the damage taken is a lot higher. Not to mention that the remixed enemy wave is considerably more threatening. There's enemies that are big and scary in tight spaces that I'm not used to fighting them in, and just enemies that are in places I just don't expect them to be in the first place. That being said, I don't think it is like a crazy big challenge or a crazy big difficulty spike. I also don't expect that there's any sort of new secret bosses or anything in this mode. They made it pretty clear that there's a few things that are Final Fantasy mode exclusive, but that they're not really, it's not really meant to be this like big content block that, you know, like, oh, you just can't do this if you don't do Final Fantasy mode. That remains to be seen. I haven't Googled anything. I haven't finished it, so I can't say anything for certain. But right now, it just feels like a continuation, or me getting to just now choose to style on enemies and gain another 50 levels and upgrade all my equipment and all that stuff that they told us we'd be able to do. That being said, in Final Fantasy mode, we were told there was another difficulty called Ultimaniac, specific to the arcade. You go into Final Fantasy mode, you click the arcade, and then you go into Ultimaniac difficulty. That is ridiculous. It's the Final Fantasy mode monsters, but the aggression level and the damage is utterly ridiculous. That's what I thought Final Fantasy mode was going to be, but no, it is an Ultimaniac. So when I finish Final Fantasy mode, I'll also go back and then go through all the arcade missions on Ultimaniac to effectively beat the game again on Ultimaniac. I guess that's the closest I can get to it, but yeah, no, Ultimaniac is scary. I was trying to go through like the first mission you're allowed to do with it, and I'm just like, oh my word, I have to change something, especially because your gear is set, your levels are set, so you can't gradually outgear it, you can't gradually outlevel it, you can only choose the skills that you want to take in there and do your damnedest, because nothing else is going to save your life. I do have a few other small things I guess I want to add, things that didn't super bother me, but I recognize them as potential like downsides for people. One, if you're someone who's even halfway decent, you may find that the challenge through your original playthrough isn't up to what you really want it to be. I didn't think it was too easy because I could see how a lot of people would struggle with a lot of the stuff that was in there, but I definitely wasn't challenged in my initial playthrough, but I kind of expected that. So again, I'm not labeling that as a negative, but I think some people will. No immediate retry options for bosses. I'm trying to do no-hit damage, no-hit boss runs, and the only real recourse for me is to save and reload. And it would be nice to just have a replay boss from the start option. The side quest design is incredibly simple. It's fantastic for world building and character stories, but in terms of actual engaging gameplay, to really no one's surprise, it doesn't do anything too fanciful. So if you're not interested in world building and lore and learning more about these characters that are just living out in the world, then they become tedious. So that's definitely worth mentioning. But I love a lot of those characters, so you know. Not a negative for me, but will be for some. Also, without spoiling anything, there was, how do I put this? There were certain Final Fantasy things I expected to see more or at all, and I didn't experience them. And that's just like a Final Fantasy like fanboy-ish kind of negative, because I guess when I think of playing a Final Fantasy, I want to see every element imaginable re-envisioned, redone, even if it's been in every game and doesn't technically need to be in a game. So without saying anything in particular, yeah, there's definitely some Final Fantasy elements I wanted to see that I did not. And I know a lot of people have been asking me about the game's performance. I played in performance mode from beginning to end. I encountered maybe 3 or 4 frame dips that were of significance, and only one of them actively made an encounter more difficult. Other than that, it's the standard while you're exploring, your frames are lower than in combat when you're in performance mode. So you get more frames when you're actually in combat. That upsets some people. I don't care as long as the game largely feels like it's running okay. So again, that's not a negative for me. I was just glad that A, it didn't crash, and B, it functioned well almost the entire time. I will say this though. If you don't care about 60 FPS in combat and you would prefer to have a consistent frame rate between exploration and gameplay, go graphics mode. If you want that 60 FPS in combat, then go performance mode, but expect, you know, the frames, essentially the total frame rate to change every time you go between battle and exploration. It's not really, I mean, it is a dip, but it's also just deliberately going down to 30 FPS. I barely even notice it's 30 FPS half the time. I know some people are also waiting for the first update that'll have a few more bug fixes. It'll have a motion blur toggle. I didn't have any issue with that again, but I know people who are really having difficulties playing because of the motion blur. So just know that the dev team is aware of that and they're working on adjusting it. Among other things like button remapping, I actually had great success with Type A, which took a little bit of getting used to, but I definitely would have liked custom mapping to change one thing, magic on L1, and then lock on triangle, and I would have swapped those two and it would have been fine. And yeah, other than that, yeah, I think that covers almost everything that I wanted to say that was spoiler free. So yeah, I'm going to wrap this video up, throw whatever footage that I can on the top of it, and yeah, that'll be good. Anyway, thanks for watching my video on Final Fantasy 16. Those are my overall thoughts on the game. If you have a PS5, buy it. If you don't, wait until it comes out on PC, or get a PS5 and then play 7 Rebirth in like, you know, 6 to 9 months or whenever that's coming out. Anyway, thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. Stay tuned for some more Final Fantasy 16 related videos, both ones on the story, the spoilers, as well as some guides I'm going to be putting out as well. Anyway, thank you. I will see you in the next one. And until then, take care.